Thank you very much. And we really are at the beginning, the genesis of a very exciting model for the country in terms of what can happen here in Germantown. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to have the opportunity today to meet some of your staff and teachers and to be able to continue with what you want to have happen here in Germantown. Let me give you a little bit of background on my philosophy in the Massachusetts Department of Education, which, unknown to me, of course, at the time, somehow got me into national stardom on the question of standards. But I was given the opportunity to be in charge of anything that had an academic component to it when I was in the department, when I was invited to be a senior associate commissioner by then Commissioner David Driscoll, who has been the chairman of the National Assessment Government Board, so some people might be familiar with his name. I had all the stars aligned in my heaven. He supported what I was doing. I had a board of education, that's a state board that supported what I was doing, and a succession of governors that supported what I was doing. So that is what it all takes in order to survive all of the wars that were still taking place with every subject that I was in charge of developing or revising K-12 standards for. My philosophy had three basic thrusts. First, I wanted to make sure that whatever we were doing was going to increase the academic achievement of all students, not particular groups, but all students, no matter what group they were in or whether they were lower achievers or higher achievers. We needed to raise the floor for everybody. Whether we closed achievement gaps was not our particular concern. It was getting everybody up higher. Those are two different directions. But as I say, this was what I was asked to be able to do in '99 when I started my work. Secondly, we were concerned about increasing the content knowledge wherever we could in our different curricula for the K-12 standards. This was particularly the case in history and science, where we wanted to be sure we could try to elevate the content knowledge that students would end up with when they graduated from high school and became citizens who could vote. And in New England, as you know, town meeting is a big deal, and anyone can go to town meeting and vote. So we really wanted to be sure we were creating knowledgeable citizens and informed citizens to the best of our ability. Third, and this is what is missing from today's climate in particular, I was concerned with increasing the academic competence of our teaching force. If we want to have first-class standards, which we all did, you have to have strong teachers who can teach to those standards, otherwise they're simply words on paper. So whatever I could do through teacher regulations, through teacher licensure tests, through professional development criteria, that's what we were doing to try to strengthen the academic competence of the teacher corps that would be coming into the state and with those practicing teachers. What we did seemed to work so well that in 2005 and then every 2 years after that, Massachusetts students hit the top on NAEP, National Assessment of Education Progress tests, in math and in reading, grade 4 and grade 8. First time this had ever happened. Every 2 years. This has been now for 5 times in a row. And this was part of what elevated my work to national attention. In addition to the fact that various groups were looking at state standards and what Massachusetts had come up with, and I give credit to the teachers and the experts who helped. I wasn't writing all of these standards, I assure you, that we had a first-class set of standards in every subject, among the best in the country. And so with that record, I was then one of the people that the commissioner at that time, Mitchell Chester, who is still the commissioner now, thought I should be on Common Core's validation committee. I thought so too. So I nagged him every week during the summer of 2009, he would call Washington every week to say, please put Sandra Stotsky on the validation committee. And finally, the day before it closed, you can see they were dragging their heels. I was put on the committee. So I was one of, at that time, 25 members of what we thought would be the final committee. Now, I'll say a little bit more about that committee in a few minutes, because it was really one of the most bizarre committees I've ever been on. It was what I thought was going to be the final committee that would look at the various drafts of Common Core standards as they were being generated by the writers, and that we, as the validation committee, would have the opportunity to put in our final word on the subject to ensure what was our charge officially, that they were internationally benchmarked, that they were research-based, that they were rigorous. Among other things, those were the most important criteria. And as you heard, I am the only mathematician on the panel, which of course told us something, because we were talking to each other the whole time about our very glowing perspectives on this committee. We were 2 of the 5 people who did not sign off because we did not agree. He was looking at math and I was looking at ELA, that these standards were internationally benchmarked, research-based, or rigorous. We each looked at our own area, and he was a mathematician from Stanford. No one could question his judgment on the math content. And I was the person who, probably better than anybody on that committee, was known as someone who was an expert on English language arts standards and what should come out of a K-12 curriculum. So, what I will tell you very briefly, because you do have a handout that has some facts on it that I have put together, because we are living in an age when, unfortunately, what you are being told are myths, are facts, and what you are being told are facts, are myths. And this is a serious issue nationally. A lot of people, especially reporters, are very confused. They hear from the people who sponsored and are promoting Common Core, and I will mention the Gates Foundation more than once. They are the main funders of these various efforts to promote Common Core. They constantly put out so-called facts that are not. And I'm being careless if I call them myths. And I'm busy trying to explain what the facts were. I was there, and no one has disputed my facts. It's just that they continue to come up with alternative views of the reality of what was there. As you may or may not be able to see, we have this page of facts. There are 15 points there, and I'm only going to go quickly through some of them. The organizations that sponsored this effort were all private organizations, and I want to say at the outset, the reason I am particularly concerned about the process that was followed, the lack of transparency in what took place, is that I have been a very devoted follower and very active member at the local level in my home community. I was a town meeting member for 10 years, which is an elected office in my hometown. I was a library trustee for 14 years, which is also an elected office in Brookline. I feel strongly about self-government, which is the larger concept that is being lost in this effort. You are all part of that here. The effort to have people learn how to govern themselves. That's what Lincoln was basically fighting the Civil War for. And I was experiencing it. It is a magnificent concept, and it's something we cherish and want to keep. And the public schools were designed to produce students, citizens, who could participate in the activities of self-government. And for that we need informed, rational, logical thinking people who can participate as you work rationally through the issues which are contentious. In any community, there are always going to be different points of view. But as people who developed town meeting hundreds of years ago in England knew, you had to go back to farming your own piece of land, town meeting had to end. You had to have several days, get through the business and the budget, and then get through. And something had to be decided. You couldn't forever go on. So you had to be able to arrive at a decision that all would live by and then move forward. And that was what self-government implied. No rulers, no dictators, no board of selection that would arbitrarily decide. So this was what I brought to this process, where we were given a charge and then could never get any information to satisfy the charge. If we were internationally benchmarking our standards, what countries were we comparing ourselves to? No information. If we were based on research, where was that research? It was never forthcoming. If these were rigorous standards, why, and this I'll mention in math because it's easier to see, why were there no standards preparing students for the highest level of math courses that they should be prepared for if they want to go into a STEM career, science, technology, engineering, math? The standards should have been in the document. Why weren't they in the document? We still don't know to this day. No one tells us. We have mysterious processes that have taken place behind the scenes in the development of what were to be our national standards. Private groups funded it, no explanations, no minutes of meetings, no open meetings. I understood what foilable documents are, Freedom of Information Act. Nothing is available. You cannot find what the feedback was for any of the drafts, what the different groups that responded said. None of that is available as information. This was not the way I was used to town affairs at the local level, where in a town I was active in, everything had to be interpreted on the internet before you would agree that even people knew what was available. I mean, this was a town that really believed in communication, and here we couldn't get anything. And we didn't know why, but we also had to sign confidentiality agreements to be on this committee. And I mention that only to indicate the mysterious nature of this committee. We had to swear in order to stay on the committee that we would never, for the rest of our lives, ever divulge what happened on the committee, what the committee did or didn't do, what it says. It's totally mysterious, totally un-American, basically, because it had nothing to do with the experiences we brought from almost any organization we belonged to. And the people who were on these various committees that were important for developing or reviewing the standards didn't seem to have the kind of credentials you would expect. That's why you have these problems that are erupting all over the country today. The people on the standards development committees were basically connected to the testing industry. That's not who I would think to be on standards development committee. Who are the people who wrote the standards? And I've got the information down on this page. In English, they were people who had never taught at any level of education, who had not majored in English, who were virtually at that time unknown to the entire field. This could never have happened in any other profession, because I know people who are doctors, lawyers, or engineers, when they have professional credentials that have to be on display for developing even a licensure test, there are expectations about what kind of people that would be drawn on so that they would be known and respected by others in the profession. And here we have just the opposite, total unknowns with no academic qualifications in English for what they were doing. We don't even know why they were chosen, why they were there, what they were paid. Their contracts are simply unavailable, non-employable. So none of this, what I thought was information that should have been available, was available, and I wouldn't sign it off. Now, I have been asked many times, well, why did Massachusetts give up its great standard? You know, people naturally trying to counter the fact that several of us who were known as the experts on content didn't sign off. Massachusetts, I was on the state board, and we all knew that race to the top money, which is your public tax money, was being made available, and $250 million of that was being promised to Massachusetts if it adopted Common Core standards. The governor was a friend of the president, and the commissioner was caught in the middle because the board of ed we have in Massachusetts appointed by the governor, so we all knew that basically this was a $250 million deal. And yes, we did get $250 million after ditching our standards. And the standards have a lot of flaws, and I've indicated them here, but I will not go into them at this point because I think now we could probably have whatever questions and answers you'd like to find out specifically.
Absolutely, that was a great summary. Appreciate that. Would it be safe to say that when you first got pulled into the evaluation committee and you heard about Common Core standards, you thought that was a good idea, and you were going to kind of help them develop these standards and have a nationwide standard? You thought that that was a good idea?
I certainly did so, and I provided in my first 13-page critique a lot of ideas that I hoped would be adopted by the standards writers. Of course, I never heard from any of them, and nothing I was promoting or suggesting ever got into the standards. The math was a little bit different, and you don't have Professor Milgram here to talk about his own experience, but I can relay to you because we talked enough about it. When he first saw the draft in September, this is something you really need to think about. The level for college readiness was Algebra 1. Algebra 1. He looked at it and said, this is ridiculous. How can Algebra 1 do admission requirements basically in math for colleges? He said, because he's a mathematician, he was speaking to two mathematicians who were writing the standards, he said, I get it up much higher than that. He's not talking about Stanford, he's talking about regular colleges and universities, but private universities could also fall within that, the scope of what Common Core as it's reached. And he got it actually bumped up to a weak Algebra 2. This was by the time the public comment draft came out in March 2010. He said, that isn't high enough either. He thought they were going to create a pathway to Calculus 1, which is what engineering colleges would require, and that would be fine. A good trig course or a good pre-calc course. It wasn't there in the final draft. We still to this day do not know why. So how anyone can say that we have rigorous standards when it goes up to at least Algebra 2. Now, this isn't just the students going to a community college. That's still a little low for community colleges as well. Or is it colleges? Any college. And it isn't as if there's no arm from the USDG that couldn't reach out to sort of twist presidents of colleges to admit what was the deal to be made, and that is, if you're declared college ready on the grade 11 test, regardless of which test consortium you belong to, you're going to be able to take credit-bearing courses in your freshman year. That's the deal. That's why they were called college ready standards. You have to understand there's something behind the name. Your old standards were high school standards, plain old ordinary high school standards. These are called college readiness standards. There's a reason for that. They are to determine who is college ready for a credit-bearing course, no remediation. Now that sounds like a wonderful deal financially when you have a huge amount of remediation in this country at college level. But as Professor Milgram said, what does that mean for math courses that have to be there for credit for someone who passes a test that may be only at the Algebra 1 or lower level? We don't know where the cut score is going to be yet, so this is still speculative. But that means that you're lowering the college level math courses down to the high school level in order to have this devil's act basically take place. That was never made clear by the Board of Ed that adopted this in 45 states, by the commissioner, who single-handedly in Wisconsin, because you don't have a state board of education, who apparently never explained this. I haven't read, and maybe you would know, if he ever explained this deal. I don't think so, because no one ever understood it. No board of education, including the Massachusetts board I was on, was willing to ask what did college readiness mean, what did it imply, what was it going to do to higher education. Higher ed was out to lunch. They had no idea they were going to be affected by what was happening in state health. The whole thing is mysterious, and it was never examined by the media, by boards of education, or by ordinary citizens who were left in the dark.
Very good. No, very good. Can you talk a little bit about standards versus curriculum? The proponents of Common Core claim that they're just standards, there's no curriculum involved in them, and that you can create your own curriculum, you can develop your own, and I guess I want to tie that into the high-stakes testing and assessments that are coming to Wisconsin next year, and how you can uncouple that and say that Common Core is just a standard.
Standards were, as we understood them before Common Core, as intellectual goals or objectives. They were what you wanted kids to be able to know in each subject area. And they weren't the curriculum, because that would be the specific text that you would use, particularly in English. It's clearer that you might have a specific goal or objective that would be a standard, and then the curriculum would be what teachers chose to address that standard. That was how it usually worked with the old state standards across the country, whether they were good or bad. That was the idea. And then the state assessments would be based on those standards in the context of what curriculum had been adopted in the state. You've got to have some sense of what kids are actually studying in order to develop meaningful test items in the point of common sense that needs to be there. It hasn't happened that way. Now, in math, it is probably closer to the truth to say that your standards help define your math curriculum, because they are math statements that have content in them in terms of when you study fractions and what kinds of fractions you study. So that becomes something that's going to be in a textbook or on a curriculum worksheet for kids to study. In English, that is not at all the case, because most of Common Core's English language arts standards are not standards, they're skills. And this has really made a huge difference and confused the entire K-12 reading English language arts curriculum. They're empty skills. They're skills like find the main idea or understand the plot and so forth, characters, which can apply to the Three Little Pigs or to Moby Dick. There's nothing that indicates grade level or even cultural reference. That comes from a true standard, which might say, and we had something like this in Massachusetts for grades 9 and 10 literature, study epic poetry, study the themes and structures of epic poetry from classical Greece and Rome. Sounds esoteric, but what are we talking about? The Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Iliad. So we're talking about something that English teachers wanted and approved of because it made sense to them. But it's not saying which work they have to read, because you can't do that at a state level. There's local control. So local teachers will choose whichever, the Odyssey, the Iliad, whatever they want, or if it's a Greek play, which tragedy they want to study to understand the classical roots for contemporary drama. Choices would be there for teachers for an actual curriculum, but the standard isn't so fuzzy or vague or broad so that it's meaningless. It isn't something like study diverse literature from across the world any period of any time. I mean, there have been standards like that that mean nothing. They're not standards at all. Standard has to get you somewhere in the ballpark, in this mid-range, so that you guide the shape of the curriculum in a way that gets you to your final goal for a high school diploma. And that, of course, becomes a local issue too. What do you think is the purpose of your high school diploma, please. And they have decided it's called a career. That never was the purpose for a high school diploma historically in this country. It was good citizenship in general when you got a high school diploma. You went on to college, it was because you took college prep courses. You didn't have to go to college, and there wasn't any expectation that you all would go to college. It didn't prepare you to be a carpenter or a plumber. Those were other things you did beyond having this general education that would prepare you for being an informed citizen with a high school diploma. And that's what it meant. So this has now been changed totally by Common Core across the country. And this is what many towns and cities are beginning to understand as they go into the tentacles that are coming out more and more visibly. And I say that because almost every week or two, there are more directions coming from the USED or from State Departments of Education about the testing situation, about arrangements with higher education. All of these little pieces are now beginning to come out and unfold very rapidly. It isn't that long ago. So let me stop there.
Very good. This kind of flows into it. It's kind of a convoluted long question, so bear with me. There's a lot of issues that people have with the so-called teaching to the test. We have the new assessments coming out in Wisconsin. We have the Smarter Balance Consortium that's created the assessment that we're going to be for math and English language arts starting next year. In your book on the death and resurrection of coherent literature, you talk about creating an end goal. You got grade 12 goal that you want to reach, kind of talking about math where you want to get to trigonometry or something other than algebra 1 or 2. You have an end goal, and you're going to back map yourself to 6th grade so you know where to start from in order to get to that point. We had a conversation last night. This is where this stems from. I actually woke up thinking about this. We had talked about the assessment, and you kind of, roundabout way said that you need the assessment in order to create a curriculum to develop the standard. You can kind of back map it that way. I don't know if I'm reading it right, but that's kind of
This is what is happening with those assessments.
Well, we don't know what the assessments are right now.
To the extent.
My thought is as we create a standard, and we're talking about creating our own assessments to go along with that, because it has to correlate. Should we start with the assessment with the end goal for grade? The assessment should measure in a specific period of time where we want the student to be at. And we're going to test them at that. But then we can take it from there and go backward and say, how do we get them to that point?
Your standards should be first, because those are your intellectual objectives. And then the curriculum you put in place should be aiming for that. And the standard and the assessments should be cognizant of the kind of curriculum that you've developed in light of those standards, and be able to assess in some meaningful way levels of performance. This becomes important. Levels of performance for achieving those standards. Not every child is going to be able to achieve at the same level. So and the National Assessment of Educational Progress has 4 different levels, and most people think 4 different levels of performance will work in general. You want to be able to show that there are higher achievers, mid-level achievers, lower achievers, because it's often hard to say that there's mastery of a standard. There are different degrees to which you can achieve mastery of understanding something, if it's a broad enough thing. We're not talking about use of periods or question marks. We're talking about something at a higher level of thinking. So that's where the assessment fits in, but the thing is all sort of compressed in time too quickly, which is what's happening with Common Core. What was part of the contract with these 2 testing consortia, Smarter Balance is one, PARCC is the other, and I'll just use its acronym, it's easier. I'll do the word for it. But those are the 2 major testing consortia funded by stimulus money. This is a violation, by the way, of the Constitution, but no one seems to care. But in any event, because federal government shouldn't be funding these assessments. But they have people that We don't know why they're there. They weren't vetted by anybody else. Professor Milgram has looked at this particularly with math, who are the quote mathematicians, and you can't say that the math educators who are creating the test items in math are as knowledgeable as the mathematicians about the content of the math items, not talking about pedagogy, talking about content. But in any event, they were also in their contracts to develop curriculum models and curriculum guides. And that was what perked up a lot of our ears when we first read the contracts, you know, the RFRs and the RFPs, which would be given to whoever these people were hiring to develop the test items for these tests that would be based on Common Core standards, based on the idea that they would have to show communities what kind of curricula they might have in place in order for these test items to be developed. And so you had curriculum guidelines, curriculum models, there was another word that was used, to suggest that the test developers would be doing the work that should have been done by the standards writers. Because in ELA, the standards writers were developing empty skills. So where is the real development of the curriculum coming from? It's going to come from the test developers who basically given a carte blanche. And they're suggesting the models. I mean, it was a backwards way to get in a design, as I see it, for how to get a national curriculum developed. And that is where the end goal of a lot of this is in a lot of our judgments, people I talk to. That's why local control has been bypassed and is being bypassed by these national tests. You have to remember that there were 4 groups, as I keep pointing out to people, large groups who were totally bypassed by the development of Common Core standards. First was parents. There wasn't a parent to be seen on anything. 2 were teachers, for the most part. That was interesting. That's why teachers and unions are now joining with parents in many states in the country, because they're becoming concerned about the teacher evaluation framework that seems to be the goal of the USPD in having test scores with which they evaluate the teachers. Teachers are going to be held accountable, not parents or kids in any way. It's teachers. And of course, this is totally unfair to teachers who cannot be held in any way totally accountable for whatever kids do. There are some other players in this whole scenario. You never hear anybody ever mention kids themselves or their parents or any other factor that should be held accountable. So you've got parents who are absent. No high school math or English teachers were on any of these committees. Now that's who you would have expected. If you're developing college readiness standards, this is what I kept saying to people I would talk to once I got on the committee. If you're developing college readiness standards, who are different groups of people that anyone with common sense would think should be in the committee? High school math and English teachers and college level people who teach those subjects to freshmen. They're the ones who understand what the kids coming from the local high school know or don't know. If anybody does, they do. They will listen. There wasn't one literary scholar. The math people who were writing the standards were simply irrelevant to the K-12 teaching, and there was no high school math teacher to inform them at all. I complained about the absence of an English teacher on evaluation. They finally got one full to 1. These are people who should be evaluating whether these standards are good enough, the high school level in English, and there was only one teacher there. And then we had state legislators, not one of them was there on any of these committees. They're paying bills, or they're going to send bills down to the local districts. And then finally, local school boards. Those were the 4 major groups bypassed by Common Core deliberately, because they could have been represented if they had been wanted. Certainly, the teachers and the parents could have been on the committees. And then local school boards, and this I've been told in many states, They had no idea what their state board was voting on. They were told after the fact, sometimes a couple of months after, I don't know when, you received some letter, maybe August, I think is what I was told, that we heard, and this was adopted here in Wisconsin on June 2nd, within minutes after the final document came out. That's, by the way, not as fast as a few states. Kentucky adopted them before they were written. So you shouldn't feel bad in Wisconsin. Minutes after the final documents, the standards were released, your commissioner voted to adopt them. I still don't understand Kentucky, but this is the nature of whatever deals were being made. Boards of Ed are usually college-educated, intelligent people. I'm not faulting their understanding of a lot of other issues. What I don't understand to this day is why none of them ever asked basic questions about what they were voting on. They wouldn't do it with the car they were buying, with the house they were buying. How could they do it with a set of standards that they were told would change American education and talk about it? Do not understand. Do not understand this at all, as they do and frustrated about how intelligent, educated people, and in your state, one person, without any advice from higher ed. I kept asking about that in the state board of Massachusetts. Shouldn't we ask higher ed to look at these high school math standards or high school English standards and give us their opinion? That's all. No. Shouldn't we have a cost-benefit analysis from our legislature, which is another thing that is often required for legislators who want to pass a bill? They have to do a cost-benefit analysis of the legislation to see what it might cost. It wasn't done by boards of ed either. They were operating unhelpful, as if what they were doing didn't matter. It was like, this was, oh, just another set of standards. Who cares? Someone would have to ask in other states, in your state you only have a commissioner to ask, why he didn't bother getting a consultation from people who could read the standards. I don't know what his background is, but I bet he's not in math or science. How many people can read a set of high school math standards? I can't. If I had a vote on them, what would I do? I would go to the college and ask an engineer, science, or a mathematician to tell me what they think of these standards. I mean, if you have a business and you want to do something, you ask experts, at least for their advice. You may not follow it. So in any event, this is still the larger picture of why we ended up where we are.